Hey everyone, welcome back to another chat. This past weekend, I had a conversation with a good friend of mine who has their PhD in statistical modeling and coding and is currently working as a pollster for the 2022 midterms. As part of our conversation, we went back and forth about some of the issues with conducting polling in the 2022 midterms, and it got me thinking that this election might not play by the normal rules, so there might be a few errors in the polling data that we're seeing in public. And there are two main reasons that I think might cause some inaccuracies that I want to get into today. The first thing that might cause an issue in the accuracy of polling data is a lower level of conservative responses. As I was having this conversation with my friend, one of the things that they mentioned is that they were having initially a very hard time getting conservatives to interact with their polls. Now, that makes perfect sense to me from their point of view. They've been told by Donald Trump and other political figures, as well as conservative news media, that the polls are fake. Therefore, why would I bother contributing to them if I know that they're going to make up the numbers anyway? Makes sense. And for those people who are more on the extreme wing of the Republican Party, they might even be tying this into other conspiracy theories. We know the polls are fake, so why are they calling me? They're just going to make up the numbers. Well, maybe it's a scheme to get my information and then report me to the FBI, CIA, whoever. But so that then they can track me and monitor me for whatever purpose. And again, from their worldview, that makes a lot of sense. That fits the narrative that they've been told by conservative leaders, and therefore, yeah, there's no good reason for them to interact with pollsters. Certainly not at a rate that would be representative of the actual conservative voting bloc. Now, thankfully, as I had this conversation with my friend, they told me about how their company has managed to overcome this hurdle and actually increase the response rate from conservatives, but I'm not going to out their trade secrets on the internet, so you'll have to trust me. However, I only know about one company. There are so many different companies out there conducting polling, and I don't know if they've all come across this solution or what solution they might have come up with to essentially balance for the fact that they're expecting a lower rate of response from conservatives than from liberals. So, that undercount of conservative voters, which we've seen in the past, it happened in 2016, happened in 2020, it may be happening again. So, I think that's going to be a big source of inaccuracy in the polling data for the 2022 midterms. But there's actually one other factor that I think might be even more impactful. The second risk factor that might impact the accuracy of the 2022 midterm polling is their chosen sample population, likely voters. Now, under any other circumstance, it makes perfect sense to target likely voters as, if you want to know the outcome, it pays to talk to the people who are actually going to come out and cast a ballot. This is especially true if you're going to provide this polling data to a campaign, since they're then going to turn around and use that data to allocate their resources. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them to spend money creating targeted ads or mailing out flyers or any other thing if the voters they're going after aren't likely to come out and vote anyway. However, 2022 may be a little bit different, and we may see a sharp uptick in the number of unlikely voters participating. Let's face it, a lot has happened in the past 2 years. To give a couple of examples, we have the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the events of January 6th, and all the committee hearings that have happened after that, the continued legal trouble for former President Donald Trump and his associates, as well as just another round of partisan infighting within the various political parties, especially on the Republican side between the likes of Liz Cheney and, again, the former President Donald Trump and his associates. So, we might see some very interesting numbers in who turns out to vote this year and how they choose to vote. We might be seeing some huge discrepancies from what we expect, and I think those unlikely voters could have a huge impact on the accuracy of the polling data. A recent example of a discrepancy between the polling data and the eventual election result comes to us from the state of Kansas. During the primary process, there was a vote on an amendment to the state constitution which would have allowed the Kansas state government to regulate and or ban abortions. Currently, the Kansas state constitution provides explicit protections for abortions, and Republicans wanted to remove that following the overturning of Roe v. Wade. In the polling leading up to the election, the data suggested that 47% of voters supported removing the abortion rights protections, while 43% wanted to maintain those protections, with 10% of voters undecided. However, when all of the votes were cast, almost 60% of the voters in this primary said that they wanted to keep the abortion protections in the Kansas state constitution, an almost 20-point swing in the polling data. So, why did this happen? Well, I think two things happened. One, this primary had a record turnout of approximately 900,000 voters. And in a primary election, that's a lot, especially in the state of Kansas. So, this is where our unlikely voters come in. These are people who felt strongly about keeping their protections for abortions in the Kansas state constitution and showed up to vote. Would they have shown up to this primary if that wasn't on the ballot? I can't say. But generally speaking, if we look at the polling data and what populations they were drawing from, they definitely missed something. And I think it's these unlikely voters who wanted to keep that protection in. There is also the argument that banning abortion is generally unpopular, and there's certainly plenty of data out there to support that, but pairing the increased turnout with the dramatic error in the polling, I think we can attribute at least some of that error to unlikely voters. And the 2022 elections are on track to see some very interesting notes in voter turnout. In the state of Georgia, they had their first day of early voting yesterday, and a record number of people turned out to cast their ballot. About 133,000 people on the first day of early voting. Now that is a huge jump from the last midterms in 2018, where only about 71,000 people came out on the first day. But what's more interesting is that that number is higher than the 2020 presidential election as well, which numbered about 120,000 voters on the first day of early voting. Now, we generally expect turnout in a midterm election to be lower than it is in a presidential election year because, well, it's not as important. The presidency is on the line, there's a little bit smaller scale campaigning because it's only your representatives and some senators. So, it's just not a high turnout election. You just don't get as many people, generally speaking. But the fact that on the first day of early voting, we had more people, not only in the previous midterm, but then the previous presidential election, come out and cast a ballot, I think that there is a very good chance that we are going to see a lot of unlikely voters come out of the woodwork in this election and make their voices heard. There's actually one other group, speaking of making their voices heard, that I think is probably being undercounted, and that's Gen Z. Now, if you look at the data, overall the history of voting that we have in the US, you are more likely to vote the older you get. That's just the numbers. However, Gen Z is adding more voters by the day, and we have seen that they are not shy about putting their opinions out there and getting involved in the political process. They have been very active according to the issues that they care about, especially along the lines of abortion rights and gun violence, and it makes sense that they're going to come out to the polls. So I think that they're another group that might be being undercounted because, statistically speaking, they are unlikely voters. But will we see them in this election cycle? I certainly think so. Now, what impact is that going to have? I can't say. There are a lot of young people on both sides of the political aisle, and frankly, you never know where they're going to show up or what they're going to do with their vote. But do I think we're going to see more of them turning out in this election? I certainly do. So, to quickly recap, there are two main risk factors that I see that might impact the accuracy of the polling for the 2022 midterms. Number one, an undercount of conservative voters. They have a lot of reasons not to engage with polls, and both in the 2016 and 2020 elections from the presidential level, we've seen that pollsters do tend to undercount conservatives, especially the most diehard supporters of former President Donald Trump. So, in this polling data, which seems to be favoring Democrats a little bit, they might be getting a little bit of false hope. There may be more conservative voters out there who just aren't willing to participate in the polling process, and therefore are being missed. But I think more importantly, number two, there are going to be a lot of unlikely voters in this election. The last 2 years have given people a lot of new reasons to come out and vote, both on the left and the right. So, frankly, who knows what's going to happen? My background is in risk assessment, but even this I'm not willing to take a stab at and say how it's going to turn out. The only thing I am pretty certain of is that we're going to get a few surprises come November. So, we'll have to wait and see. Until then, think about it. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my content, subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I post new videos. If you want to support me on my other social media platforms, all of the links you need will be in the video description below. If you have any questions about this video or another topic that you'd like me to discuss, leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get you an answer. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.